Greetings Internet! I had this idea for a video at the beginning of the year, or I suppose technically at the end of last year, but I never quite got around to doing it, partly because I wasn't quite sure which channel to put it on. Sort of maybe belonged on my DVD channel, but I didn't really want to interrupt my Disney Classics series by putting it on there. But I figured, it may have general interest, so why not fill a VEDA slot with it? So let's talk about my film viewing statistics, and to do that, let's go to the computer. I've been logging every film I watch in Letterboxd since 2014, and a couple of years before that on a site called iCheckMovies. I've been through various lists of films and attempted to make sure I have also logged everything I think I've seen before that time, but obviously the earlier you go in that list, the less accurate it becomes. But I believe I've got a reasonably accurate count, and so that leaves me with the total of having seen 1,732 films in the course of my life, which in general seems like quite a lot, but then you have to realise that, say, 261 of those came from just last year. Although that is, of course, by far the highest number of films I've ever seen in a year. The previous record before that was 2014 with 127. Although 2017 was also fairly notable, hits clocking in at 100. But going back to the overall lifetime stats, it's interesting and fairly obvious that most of the films I've seen are from sort of around the 80s and onwards. But the earliest film I've ever seen is from 1927. The silent film Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. A few other early ones, 1931, Fritz Lang's M. 1934, Cleopatra, and then 1937 we have the first Disney, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. On the other end of the scale, the most recent things I've seen, probably Birds of Prey, also Horse Girl and The Invisible Man. They're the only 2020 releases I've seen so far. I would have gone to more, but the cinema's shut at the moment. Down here we have some interesting list progress. I've only seen 24% of Oscar Best Picture winners. I've only seen 7% of the top 100 films directed by a woman, which is something I definitely need to work on. And the whole diversity thing is something I kind of started paying more attention to after looking at my most watched actors in 2018 and just seeing how white and male they were. Although we do have a few more diverse entries in the top 20, I was only looking at the top 10 when I thought about that. So I made it my goal for 2019 to purposely make sure I watched more things with, actors of colour. And so I ended up picking certain, high-profile actors of colour and trying to make sure I watched all of their works, which started off with the likes of Samuel L. Jackson and Denzel Washington. Also some Morgan Freeman in there. But of course the slight problem with that approach is that I've now seen all those films. I can't repeat that because I've seen all of Samuel L. Jackson's backlog. Ashley Judd ended up being a fairly interesting addition to this list, which was completely unintentional to start with. It just so happened that in the 90s, early 2000s, she seemed to co-star with Samuel L. Jackson quite a lot. But then after noticing her creeping up into the top 10, I did specifically seek out a couple of films that just starred her in order to keep her in the top 10. And picking films just based on the stars of those films was an interesting way to go, but it's very much a quantity over quality kind of situation. A lot of the things Samuel L. Jackson starred in the 90s, early 2000s were pretty terribly mediocre, and I wouldn't really recommend watching a great many of them. And as I mentioned before, I've very much got to find some more not male directors to watch. Even if you go and look at directors for all time, it's still very white and male, and very, very much the usual suspects. And the same can be said for all-time actors. There's a small smattering of women in there and a little bit of colour, but it could be way more diverse. So far this year I've only hit 50 new films watched. which averages about 3 a week, which I guess is probably still above average for most people. Looking at the graph here, it seems there was only one week where I didn't watch anything. And there's still quite a lot of the year to go, so I will probably end up watching quite a lot more. Originally, I had hoped to see less at home, but see more at the cinema so that my backlog didn't continue getting bigger. But with the cinema closed, I'm not sure I'm going to get to my original target of 50 films at the cinema this year. My previous record of cinema visits in a single year was only 20. So far this year, there's quite a few old black and white people in my most watched actors due to my rewatch of the Disney classics. There's a quick peek at what I've seen so far this year, and the final interesting thing, the countries in which they were made. I think it'd be a fun challenge to try and fill this map in one year, but I also imagine that the film industries in places like Ethiopia and Somalia aren't hugely massive, and there may not be a lot of choice for places like that, particularly Central Africa. Or maybe there are and I've never heard of it, but the chances of those being available to stream on Netflix are also fairly low. If we have a look at the world map for all time rather than just last year, we see that, there's only South Africa and Angola that I've got ticked off, not anything from anywhere else in Africa. One final interesting stat I noticed is that of the 261 films I watched in 2019, that averages at 5 per week, but I was still watching most of them on the weekends. I got to that number by watching 2 or 3 a day on Saturdays and Sundays rather than spreading them out throughout the week. Anyway, follow me at letterboxd.com/DoonDoesDVD if you want to have a more in-depth nose at my statistics. Hopefully that was at least somewhat interesting. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow.